So it's time for a wee bit of life on Earth revision for the first test. One of the first things we had to learn about was what a biome is. And a biome is just a way of describing an area of the Earth. And you would say it's an Arctic biome, so it's going to be cold, or you would say it's a desert biome, so it's going to be quite hot with low rainfall. We live in what's called a temperate biome, so it's never very hot, it's never very cold, it's kind of average all through the year. Another word we needed was biodiversity, and biodiversity is just the range of living things that you find in an area. So somewhere like a city would have quite a low biodiversity. On the other hand, if you looked at a rainforest, rainforests have got high biodiversity. Human activities usually decrease biodiversity, and we do that because of things like destroying habitats, so the place where something lives, we destroy it, and we do that by deforestation, which we cut down trees, or sometimes by pollution, where we would either accidentally or deliberately release chemicals that are hazardous to the things that live in a place. There's also things like natural disasters, that's things like volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes. They can also destroy a habitat and cause a decrease in biodiversity. There are some words you need to learn for this topic. So biodiversity is one, that's the range of living things. Then we've got population, which is the number of things of one species in an area. So you might have a population of humans, or a population of swans, or a population of ducks in an area, but they're all the same species. Community, on the other hand, is sometimes confused with it. Community is all the living things in an area, so it's all the different species, all the plants and animals in a place and called a community. Then a habitat is just the place, that's where they stay. So it could be a log, it could be a woodland, anything like that. And then the other one is ecosystem. An ecosystem is the community in the habitat, so it's all the things that live in a place and the place, we call that an ecosystem. And that's a fairly common question. You'll get a question that says, what is an ecosystem? And all you have to say is, it's the community in the habitat where they live. We also have to learn a bit about energy and how that flows through an ecosystem. So all energy comes from the sun, and things like plants are called producers. They make their own food from sunlight, and they're always green plants. You always find them at the beginning of a food chain. So producers, always green plants, you're always going to get them at the beginning of the food chain. Everything else is a consumer. Now, it could be a primary consumer, that's something that eats plants, or it could be a secondary consumer, which is something that eats the primary consumer. So carnivores would be secondary consumers. A food chain is a diagram that shows the flow of energy through the ecosystem, and it goes from producers to consumers. Common question on that one is, what do the arrows show? And the arrows show the direction of energy flow. So don't get involved in saying the arrows show who eats what or what's eaten by what. No. The answer they're looking for is the arrows show the direction of energy flow. In the real world, you rarely get a food chain. You really don't get a case where something's only eaten by one thing or something only eats one thing. So usually you get something called a food web, where the energy can flow in different directions from maybe one plant to maybe 2 or 3 different types of animals, because they all eat it. And that's called a food web, and that's a lot more realistic than compared to what you get in real life. We need to have a few words for different diets. So we had some herbivores eat plants, and we had carnivores eat animals, and finally you've got omnivores that we eat both. A niche is the role that something plays in an ecosystem. So, for example, if you're in Scotland, then the big herbivore is a deer. If you went to somewhere like Africa, the big herbivore could be something like a zebra. But they both perform the same role, they're both big herbivores. Back on competition. Competition occurs when something's in limited supply and 2 or more organisms need it. Now, there were 2 types of competition. There was intra-specific competition, and that's between organisms of the same species. Now, because of the same species, they have the same needs, and this is a very strong kind of competition because they've got the same sort of needs. On the other hand, you also get inter-specific competition, and that's between 2 different species. So that's a less strong kind of competition because they don't have identical needs. For example, I would compete with all the humans for chocolate because we all like it. On the other hand, so I hate it obviously. On the other hand, I don't compete with my dog for his dog food because it's dog food and I wouldn't eat it. So he gets all that to himself, I just wouldn't compete with that. So our needs are different because he's a different species We don't have a strong competition. On the other hand, humans, same thing means there's strong competition. The distribution of living things around the planet depends on factors in the environment like temperature or food availability. And we break them down into two types as well. There are biotic factors, and that's things like food availability or diseases. And then there's non-living factors, and we call in abiotic factors, and that's things like temperature or light intensity. We can measure those, but you have to be a bit careful. Remember, if you're using the light meter, you make sure the shadow doesn't fall on the sensor on the top of the light meter. And if you're using the pH meter or the moisture meter, you make sure to wipe the probe with a bit of paper towel before you actually put it in the ground and take a reading. We need to know about how people find out the number of living things in their area. Now, you could just count them all, but that would be a terrible job. So what we do is we take a sample and we just count the ones that are in a small part of the area. Now, for things that don't move very fast, so for plants, we can use a quadrat, which is just that square thing that's broken up into other squares. And for things that do move, for things like the insects that go on the ground, we use a thing like a pitfall trap, which is where you put a plastic tub, like a pot noodle tub, into the ground. The insects come along and fall into it, and that's how you can sample those ones. Finally, we need to know about keys. Now, keys are a way to help you identify organisms that you don't know. The one you learned about was called a pairs statement key, so it uses a series of numbered statements, and usually in the question they'll give you a table of information about the living things, and you'll find that no two of them are identical. There's always going to be at least one difference between the different types of plants or animals on the table, and you're unlikely to have to build a key from scratch. They will give you one that's got bits missing and you have to fill in the blanks. And another thing to remember about them is at the end of the statement it'll give you an instruction or the name of an animal. So if you've got all the way down identified the animal or the plant, it'll just have the name of the organism. If there's still maybe another step to go, then it'll be a go-to, so it'll go to 4 or go to 5 or something like that. So at the right hand side there has to be the name of the organism or go to. On the left hand side there's a pair statement. And usually they'll be fairly easy to tell the difference. Like if one of them says has 6 legs, then the other one's going to be something like has more than 6 legs. And we go to different places or identify different animals through that. And that's most of the sort of things we need to know about life on Earth in just a few minutes.